Good morning, and to our friends joining us abroad, good evening. Welcome to Mirage Talks. Today, we welcome Managing Partner at JumpSpeed Ventures, Ben Wiener, to touch on the subject, the only thing that matters, and the key to startup success according to the world's greatest investors. Ben, thank you so much for joining us today. Let's get started.
All right, thank you so much. Thanks everyone for joining. I think I've asked for Q&A to be at the end, so if you have questions, just hang on to them, and hopefully this will be a thought-provoking and question-provoking presentation, so happy to answer questions towards the end. As the title suggests, this is almost an arrogant, aggressive title, and the only reason in which that I allow myself to use that title is because I've stolen it from somebody else. So I'll explain who I am and how I get to this topic in a moment, and then we can dive into the presentation. Okay, so who am I? Ben Wiener, Managing Partner of JumpSpeed Ventures, which is an early stage venture capital fund based in Jerusalem, Israel, which invests exclusively in early stage startups from the Jerusalem, Israel startup ecosystem. This is not an idealistic thesis. This is a purely pragmatic, almost opportunistic thesis that I developed almost a decade ago, kind of responding to the mismatch of supply and demand for early stage capital in the capital of Israel, of the startup nation, where, as many of you know, many technology companies come out of the country, but many people don't know that most of them are in the Tel Aviv central area. Jerusalem was kind of left as a backwater for many, many years. And when the ecosystem started to have a bit of a renaissance in 2013, early 2014, I was fortunate enough to see that opportunity and kind of step in and raise a little bit of capital to begin investing in some of those early stage companies, some of which have become incredible global leaders in their fields, including a company called Breezometer, which was just acquired by Google for a couple $100 million. I was fortunate to be the first investor, very first check in that company. So I've learned a lot over the last 9-10 years about investing and picking early stage startups, and a lot about not only what works, but what doesn't work. And most of my important lessons have been gathered from some of the smartest people in the business. So much of what you're going to hear in this presentation is not my own, but is really the best of the stuff that I've read and learned from some people that are just infinitely smarter than me, which gives me the confidence to present it to you, because again, it's not really my own innovative thoughts. It's more my collection of some of the best stuff that I've ever heard or read that I've been able to incorporate into what I do as an investor and what I preach or teach or impart to the companies that I'm privileged to invest in. Before I became an investor, just so you have some background on me, we moved to Israel from New York about 24 years ago. I was a corporate lawyer. I clerked on the Israeli Supreme Court after graduating from Columbia Law School in New York. The Israeli Supreme Court is in a lot of the news today. I have an interesting perspective from the inside on the judicial reforms that are being debated in Israel, having been there 26 years ago. I was an entrepreneur and a business person for most of my career here in Israel. And then, like I said, about 10 years ago, started my own venture capital fund to invest in early stage Jerusalem startups. Okay, so enough about me. Let's dive into the presentation itself and hopefully highlight or maybe clarify or at least identify some of the issues that maybe some of you in early stage startups may have encountered or thought about, but I'll try to put words and phrases into some of the feelings that a lot of early stage entrepreneurs, including myself, have encountered over our journeys through this crazy world of early stage. So before we even get into what the most important thing is for the success of an early stage startup, what is a startup? It's a really interesting question. And the slide on the screen kind of gives it away, but believe it or not, there are actually multiple definitions, and we'll get into that later in the presentation. So a startup is not a company. When I started my first startup and told my mom that I had started a startup, she said, "What does your company sell?" And I said, "It's not a company and it doesn't sell anything. Like we're going to develop a product. It's going to take us 2 years to develop the software that we're going to ultimately sell." And she said, "Wait a second, do you get a salary from this startup? And I said, yeah, of course. She said, how do you have money to earn a salary if you don't have any revenues or sales? And I said, well, we raised money from investors. And she paused and she said, do the investors know that you're using their money to pay your salaries? So a startup is a very different animal than a typical company. And the two best definitions of what a startup are both from the same person. So I'll introduce one of them now and one of them later. That person is Steve Blank, Professor Steve Blank, who's really the godfather of the lean startup movement. He's very famous. If you haven't heard of him, you should. If you haven't heard some of his interviews, you should. He's a great thinker from really the old guard of what's now the old guard of startup methodology. And here's his first definition. And look at the words that I've highlighted. The definition of a startup is a temporary organization designed to search for a repeatable and scalable business model. So again, look at all these words. It's not a company, it's a temporary organization. It's very, very chaotic. It's very unstable. And frankly, the vast majority of them are not going to survive. It's very, very unsteady. And it's unsteady because it's searching for something that it doesn't have yet. And that thing that it's searching for is a repeatable and scalable, sustainable business model. So a startup is like an evolutionary being. It has to change. It can't stay the same. As opposed to most companies, if you start a pizza place or a restaurant, you pretty much know what you're going to sell on day one. A startup is very, very different. It's an exploration. It's a journey, and that's built into the definition of what it is. Okay, so now that we've understood that a startup is something in flux, very unstable, searching for something that it does not yet have, which is a repeatable, scalable business model. Let's get into what the key to that search is. What is it? What underlies that search or that journey? What is the most important thing in that journey? So the best way to understand the evolution of a startup, and there are lots of different ways to explain this, and Steve Blank himself has his own, it's always a three-part process, but I like this metaphor better than Steve Blank's own three-part explanation. And this metaphor is from a friend of mine named Jeff Busgang, who's a partner at Flybridge Capital in Boston. And Jeff, I think, has the best metaphor for the journey of the successful startup. Every startup starts off in the jungle. A subset of those make it onto the dirt road, and a subset of those, the successful ones, make it onto the highway. Now, the vast majority of startups will not make it out of the jungle. And the jungle metaphor applies really well. You have a small team, you're hacking, you don't have clear organization, you're very unstable. You might not even have a clear map of how to get out. You can't, in a really good jungle, you can't tell whether it's day or night. The overhang above you blocks the sun and the sky. And there are a million things that can threaten your survival on a minute-to-minute daily basis in the jungle. So that's very typical of what the experience is for an early stage startup founder. And if you apply Steve Blank's definition to the three-part methodology, or the three-part process or journey, then it fits really nicely. Every startup starts off as a temporary organization in the jungle, searching for something, which is the beginning of that repeatable, and that's the dirt road, that initial traction, it's very rugged, but at least you're out of the jungle. And then finally, you get to the scalable, sustainable business model, which is the glorious, highway with clearly marked exits and entry ramps, and you have a CFO and a COO and a CMO and customer service and revenue coming in, and clearly organized expenses going out. Again, the vast majority of startups are never going to make it out of the jungle. And so what we need to focus on for the purpose of the next 15, 20 minutes is not really the dirt road or the highway. The most important thing for an early stage startup is, frankly, to get the heck out of the jungle. And what does that mean? What does it mean to get out of the jungle? What's required within this metaphor? And is there something that's the most important thing? And obviously, we're going to try to propose that there is. So again, the jungle, the dirt road, the highway is the metaphor that should guide us in understanding where we are in our startup journey. And by the way, just as an aside, it's very helpful, I think, to apply this metaphor. Sometimes I encounter early stage startups that are not yet out of the jungle, and they're very worried about, weekly organizational meetings and division of roles and responsibilities and lots of, reporting. And you say to them, guys, like, that's something for later on. Right now, you just got to get out of the jungle. And it explains why it's okay for startups to be kind of chaotic in the beginning, because it's just a frantic rush to get out of the jungle. And then once you get out, you can start to worry about other things that might be less concerning or less important in the jungle phase. The things that become important later on might not have been important in the earlier stages. So again, I'm going to skip over that point, but I'm just putting it out there that some startup founders don't understand that they have to act differently when they're in the jungle phase than when they're in the dirt road phase and the highway phase. The great ones, the Bill Gates, the Steve Jobs, are able to transform as leaders. They're great jungle leaders, and then they become great dirt road leaders, and then they become great highway leaders. And it's very hard to make that transition for a lot of people. Some people are really, really good at the jungle and aren't that good at more organized or more structured phases. And that's okay. You have to understand who you are and what you're good at. But that's often why some founders either have to leave the company or are asked to leave the company once it gets to be somewhat successful. It's counterintuitive, but you sort of understand why now, because the same kind of person who's really, really good at navigating the jungle sometimes isn't good at the dirt road or the highway phase and needs to be replaced. And it's not necessarily a failure or a bad thing. It just means that we need additional kinds of management for those other phases. So this helps to explain some other phenomena that happen in a startup journey that might be hard for some founders to swallow, but when you understand it in this context, it starts to make a little bit more sense. Okay, so moving on. Now we've established that getting out of the jungle is the most important thing, but what does that mean? So now I'm going to introduce the title of the talk and where I got it from. Probably the most important blog post or article that's ever been written, in my opinion, and in many other people's opinion, in venture capital, was written by none other than Marc Andreessen, the first half of the partnership of Andreessen Horowitz, A16Z, one of the preeminent venture capital funds in Silicon Valley. Andreessen, before that, was an entrepreneur himself. He basically invented the web browser that we all use. That technology was invented by Marc Andreessen and a couple other people when he was a student at the University of Illinois, if I'm not mistaken. So Andreessen is a very prominent voice today, but back then when he was transitioning from an entrepreneur to a venture capitalist, he writes this article that is really like a middle finger at the time to the established venture capital establishment. And he titles it as only he can, because he's got that kind of attitude. This is the only thing that matters. Like everything else is BS. Everything else doesn't matter. This article is here I am. Welcome to the world. I'm Marc Andreessen. I'm going to be a venture capitalist. And I'm going to start my career by establishing what the most important thing is, the only thing is for an early stage startup. Okay, so Marc, what is it? What is that only thing that matters? What is the one thing that makes the difference between an early stage successful startup and all the rest that don't succeed? What is it? So it's 3 words. And those 3 words are product market fit. And this is about as anticlimactic as you can get. Like, oh my God, are you kidding me? I just registered for a webinar. If I'm in Israel, it's 10 o'clock at night. I'm listening to some bozo telling me that the most important thing for a startup is product market. Like what startup in the world would invent a product that doesn't match a market? Like, this is the most ridiculous thing we've ever heard, if you want to be really cynical. What do you mean, product market fit? So what I'm going to explain to you in the next couple of minutes is that product market fit doesn't mean what it sounds like. It doesn't mean what we think it means. It means something much more complex, much more difficult, and I'll try to unpack some of that difficulty. Andreessen does a pretty good job in the article of explaining some of it, and I'll try to add to it with some other learnings and teachings from some other really, really smart people and 1 or 2 pieces of my own insight. So the only thing that matters is product market fit. And the truth is, before we even start to question what that means, the fact is that surveys show that in general, the vast majority of the most common reason for startup failure is that there was a lack of product market fit. So counterintuitively, even though almost all startups are creating a product that matches some market, yet we're claiming that the number 1 reason for failure of startups is some lack of match between the product and the market. What in the world is going on here? What does product market fit really mean? Okay, so the only way out of the jungle is product market fit. And the boundary I would argue between the jungle and the dirt road is achieving product market fit. What in the world is product market fit? What do we mean by that? And why is it so elusive? Why does this concept present such a barrier for so many, great teams and great ideas and great products not making it even to the dirt road, let alone to the highway? So without, dragging this out anymore, in order to understand what product market fit is, let's just start up, let's try to understand what product market fit isn't. So product market and fit imply that there's, some people buying, things in a certain place. The place could be the internet, but it's people, places, and things. That makes up a marketplace. And lack of product market fit means there's something wrong. There's some mismatch between the people and the places and the things. So something's not right in that mix. So let's give you a slightly humorous, possibly, example. So I went to school in New York City before I moved to Israel. On the Lower East Side of New York, when I was going to college, there was a place called Gus's Pickles. Now, I'm a New Yorker. I love pickles. And I'm in college. I want to be popular and successful, maybe with the ladies, right? Gus's Pickles has a banner over their store on the Lower East Side that says, Gus's Pickles, our pickles make you sexy. So you would think that pickles make you sexy, right? The other thing that you definitely want to do if you're in college and you're interested in the opposite gender is you want to brush your teeth, right? You want to make sure that your breath smells good, and so that you don't embarrass people at parties. So you would think that if Gus's Pickles make you sexy and toothpaste is important, that pickled flavored toothpaste might be a winning product, because you got your pickles that make you sexy, you got your toothpaste that you need for a nice party. But you'd all agree that this is completely ridiculous. And this product, I'm sure, did not do very well. So you have the right thing, pickle flavor, which might work in certain contexts. You have the other right thing, which is toothpaste, which might work in certain contexts. But the match or the mix of pickle and toothpaste creates a mismatch of product market fit. Okay, I'm just giving you a slightly, hopefully, tongue-in-cheek example of what's not product market fit, but there's some other examples that are a lot more serious that are the equivalent of pickle flavored toothpaste. Here's one. I don't know if you guys have heard of Quibi. It didn't last very long, but during the first year of COVID, I think it was 2021, Quibi launched to great fanfare. I mean, Quibi was probably the most hyped startup ever in the history of the world. Amazing team. Meg Whitman, who was former president of, chairman of, I think, CEO of eBay. Jeffrey Katzenberg, one of probably the most connected person in Hollywood, former Disney exec. These were people who were incredibly talented in the entertainment space, very, very technically adept. And they raised a ridiculous amount of money to create what was meant to be basically the Netflix of your mobile phone. Quibi did not last very long. They launched, and like many startups, launched and didn't succeed. They lasted for a couple months, but the numbers are staggering, especially relative to the team that started the startup. So many of you may have raised a seed round, maybe trying to raise a seed round. Maybe you want to raise $1 million, $2 million would be a nice seed round. Quibi's seed round, and these are not typos, Quibi raised close to $2 billion in seed capital from some of the smartest people in the world, had some of the smartest executives in the world with incredible founder market fit, from the industry, incredibly well connected. And lifetime, from inception to its closure, Quibi generated, and that's again, not a typo, a little bit more than $3 million in revenue. I have companies in my portfolio that have more than that in revenue that you've never heard of. This was a total epic failure, a total disaster. Best team, interesting product, amazingly funded. What went wrong? Here's another example. This is even more close to home for me. This is a picture of a sofa. And about 9 years ago, just as I was becoming a professional investor, again, being paid by wealthy people to manage their money and make decisions about investing in startups, a friend of mine told me that he was traveling to San Francisco for a conference, and the hotels were all sold out, but he had found a small website where he could rent a room in someone else's apartment for a fraction of the cost of a local hotel. And he was going to do it. He was going to stay in this other person's apartment for like $30 a night. And the name of the website, he told me, was airbedandbreakfast.com. And I said to him, are you kidding me? You're going to stay in some stranger's apartment for $30 a night? You've never even met these people? That is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. That will never work. Obviously, that was Airbnb. And I was not the only professional investor who thought that that was ridiculous. Airbnb struck out with almost every VC that they met with initially, and were barely lucky to raise their seed round. And of course, when they went public, they were valued at over $100 billion. They're now at about $75 billion market cap. So all those investors who passed on Airbnb and said, like me, that's ridiculous, that will never work, were very wrong. And in fact, Brian Chesky, the CEO of Airbnb, published, and you can read them, some of the rejection emails that he got from VCs. And if you think about it, they're not crazy. Like they're being very respectful to him and saying, hey, we just don't think this is going to work. And these were some of the top VCs in the world who were passing on this incredible golden opportunity. So it turns out that getting to product market fit is a lot harder than we thought it was. And the one type of person who's not going to always know whether your startup is going to get product market fit is this guy. If it's not obvious from the similarity, that's me, right? The professional investor, no matter how smart they think they are, or handsome, or funny, or highly hyped, whether they're on the Midas list or not, even the best investor, all those investors that passed on Airbnb, all those investors who put billions of dollars into Quibi are often going to get it wrong when they try to figure out which startup is going to ultimately get to product market fit. So it turns out that it's really, really hard. It's hard for us too. Not only is it hard for the founders, it's hard for the professional investors to guess which startups are going to reach product market fit or not. And sometimes those failures are epic, both on the upside, where we miss an opportunity that is amazing, where we think it won't work, and on the downside, where we think something is amazing and it's a total failure. So it turns out that product market fit is elusive and really hard to predict, not only for founders, but also for professional investors. So why is it so hard? Right? So this guy's not the one who's gonna determine whether something has product market fit. And so who are the people that are going to determine whether something has product market fit? Well, you can probably guess the answer. It's the market, and only the market. Only the market's going to know whether something's going to get product market fit, because they're going to determine whether that product gets product market fit. And the market is very, very hard to figure out. Okay, so another way to say this in words, again, and this is a quote from that same Andreessen article where he quotes a VC named Andy Rachleff, who I would encourage anybody in the startup space to listen to anything that Andy Rachleff has ever said. I mean, he gives a number of interviews once in a while, like once a year. His interviews are golden. He was a partner at Benchmark. He himself has founded a number of successful companies, and he just has a way of articulating things that are in your head, but you can't articulate, that he articulates very clearly. So Andreessen understands this, and he quotes Rachleff in his article. We're going to meet Rachleff again in a slide or two. And Rachleff has this great quote, which is right here on the slide. When a great team meets a lousy market, the market wins. When a lousy team meets a great market, the market wins. Turns out the market always wins. Like you could have Jeffrey Katzenberg and Meg Whitman creating Quibi, but if the market doesn't want Quibi, the market's going to crush them. Like they can't force the market to accept their product just because it raised $2 billion and because they're amazing. If it's the wrong product, the market's going to kick it out the door. And if you have a lousy team, take an example like, I don't know, Mark Zuckerberg, 19-year-old dropout from Harvard, never did anything in his life, doesn't even understand what he's built. If you watch the early interviews of Zuckerberg, he has no idea what he's got. There's a famous early interview of Zuckerberg on YouTube where he says, the interviewer asks him, he's like 19 or 20 years old. Interviewer says to him, where do you think the Facebook.com, that's what it's called then, the Facebook.com, where do you think the Facebook.com is going to go, one day? And he says, well, the Facebook.com is on Harvard campus and Columbia campus right now. I foresee a day when it's going to be on all of the college campuses of America. Like, he didn't even see past college campuses. He was a pretty lousy team. He had never done anything in his life. He was unproven, but he produced a product that the market really, really wanted. And he was smart enough to be able to continue to push it as it took off. So there's not necessarily a correlation between the pedigree of not necessarily, right? A correlation between the pedigree of the team. It's more about, is the product something that the market really, really wants? Now, obviously, Ratcliffe says, when a great team makes a great market, that's what I'm really looking for, because then it's amazing, because then they really know what to do with the amazing product and market that they've fit. But it's not required. It's not required that the team be amazing. They just have to be good enough to figure out how to capitalize if they're fortunate enough to find something that has amazing product market fit. This was very controversial when Andreessen published it, because most VCs prided themselves on finding these superstar, and still do, finding these superstar entrepreneurs and backing them regardless of what they were working on. And Andreessen said, no, we're going to find amazing product market fit regardless of who created it, and we're going to back those people. So this was very controversial, and he felt that Ratcliffe's quote backed him up. Now, the problem is, and the reason why, why it's so hard, it's easy for me to talk about, yes, product market fit, not product market fit, but the problem is it's more complicated than that. And what happens is most founders, like I said, are producing something that some part of the market wants. The problem is, and this is probably best articulated in the famous book by Geoffrey Moore called Crossing the Chasm, the market often misleads you. Sometimes you'll find that a couple people or a couple companies will be interested in the product, but then it kind of stalls. And that's really that chasm that Moore is talking about. And what I call the black hole of meh. Like you've given yourself to this product. You've devoted a year or 2 or 3 of your life to this product. You care about it very, very deeply. I'm not talking to you, the person listening. I'm just saying, a founder cares about it very deeply, but the founder doesn't realize that the market is generally not looking for new products. The vast majority of the market doesn't want to try new things. In fact, they're adverse to trying new things, especially when you talk about, whether it's consumers. Again, like, ask yourself, if you're anything like me, when was the last time you downloaded a new app to the front page of your phone? For me, it was probably a year or 2 ago. So it's probably been 12 months or more since I downloaded a new app that I use regularly on the front page of my phone. So, and on average, it's been proven that the average consumer downloads less than 1 new app per year that they use heavily. So there are millions and millions of apps that are uploaded to the app stores every year, but the vast majority of them on the consumer side are not used heavily and just completely vaporize. We have no patience to try all these different things. We have limited time, limited attention span, and we're just not that interested in changing our status quo behavior, except for a very small minority of us who will try anything. The vast majority of us aren't interested. And we need to be incredibly convinced somehow that product will affect our lives in order for us to even try it, even if it's for free. And on the business side, it's the same thing. That person that the B2B founder is trying to sell to, she has probably a supervisor or a boss. She's responsible to somebody. And if she makes a recommendation that the company try this newfangled, wacky new startup and it doesn't work, well, her job's on the line, her reputation's on the line. So it's going to take a lot for somebody, whether they're a consumer or a business consumer, to change their behavior and try something new, even if it's free, even if it's offered to them for nothing. Most startups and most products end up falling into this black hole of meh, like, okay, it's interesting, but it's not interesting enough to make me care enough to take the 45 seconds I need to take to download it onto my phone, or to try it out in a proof of concept or a pilot, for me to take it to my bosses to recommend that we use this new thing. The hurdle is much higher than we think as founders. And the way I try to articulate it is, again, borrowing from Andreessen's partner, Ben Horowitz, who himself borrowed it probably from Andy Grove. He says a startup, in order to succeed, needs to be not better than the competition, but actually 10x better. It has to be a revolutionarily different experience or benefit just in order to get the market to pay attention. And what that means is that the bar for reaching product market fit is much, much higher than just a fit between a product and a market. What we need is something that's what I would call extreme product market fit, revolutionary product market fit, just a radically different, game-changing, paradigm-shifting, order of magnitude difference in all the other ways that the consumer or the business person is dealing with that problem or opportunity, just in order for us to get them to pay attention to the thing that we're proposing. Now you start to see where product market fit doesn't mean what we think it means. It means something much more complex, much more nuanced, much more complicated, and a much higher bar of attention grabbing than we might have thought just by reading Andreessen's initial phrase of product market fit. And again, here's Andy Rachleff again. The best way, I think, to articulate this in one sentence is through his question. And he says, every founder needs to look themselves in the mirror and ask themselves this question: what do you uniquely offer that people will desperately want? And I've highlighted the words that are important there. It's not what do you offer that people will want. That's not good enough. There might be some people that want what you're offering. There always will be some percentage of people that want what you offer, but that's not good enough. You need something that is so highly differentiated, probably, that is so unique, that is going to cause people, whether they're consumers or business people, to desperately want it in order to clear the bar of product market fit. And he says something very, very firm, which I would never say, but he's allowed to say it. If you just do something that's good enough, or even better than the competition, but it's just good enough, it's not radically better, you're doomed. Now that's a very strong statement, and you can apply this to a lot of startups that you know or that you've seen where they had something better, maybe twice as good as the competition, and still failed. And they'll say, oh, we failed because we couldn't raise money and the investors didn't understand it. And frankly, they probably failed because in that case, 2x, twice as good, might not have been good enough. They might have needed to be 10 times better than everything else in order to have a chance of success. Now, I am sure at this point, you are yelling out lots of questions, and these are good questions. What I'm saying here are general rules. You can find exceptions. You know, is Lyft 10x better than Uber? No, they're kind of the same. In some markets, you have opportunities to be just as good or slightly better than the competition and still succeed and survive and thrive. But those are rare. Usually startups are more or less winner take all. And usually the winner is just an order of magnitude better than everything else that's available for that opportunity or problem in the market. Again, I should have said this at the beginning. Everything I say, take it with a grain of salt. Everything I say has caveats. Everything I say is general rules that have exceptions. And here, Andy Rachleff is no different. What he's saying is, generally speaking, if it's not unique enough to cause people to desperately want it, you're probably doomed. There might be ways around this, but generally speaking, this is a general rule. Now, I said that we're going to get to two different startups definitions, both by Steve Blank. So we're going back to the first definition of Steve Blank. I want to introduce a new concept towards the end of this lecture. Steve Blank's first definition of a startup is a temporary organization seeking a scalable, sustainable business model. Very nice. We already covered that. What's interesting is he has a totally second definition, a totally parallel definition, which I also love, which is equally powerful and opens up a whole new angle of thought for us as startup founders. Here's the second definition, equally interesting and by the same guy. A startup is a faith-based organization seeking to become a fact-based organization. Okay, so when you think about how do you introduce your product to the market, how do you get this thing that you think is 10 times better to the market and attract their attention and get them to change their behavior? Well, the startup needs to act a little bit like something else, which is a faith-based. What else do we know that's a faith-based organization? A religion. A startup, says Steve Blank, is a religion. You're starting a new religion. And the cool thing about a startup, as opposed to a religion, where, we can have a religious debate about my religion and your religion. And the point is, none of us will ever be able to convince the other that factually we're right, because by definition, a religion needs to stay faith-based and belief-based and isn't fact-based. If it's fact-based, it's a science. But the cool thing about a startup is it starts off its life as a faith-based religion because it believes in something that it can't yet prove. But it needs to very quickly become fact-based. It very quickly needs to morph from a religion into a science. It needs to bring evidence, factual evidence that it has product market fit. So the transition between jungle and dirt road and highway, the transition between a temporary organization seeking a scalable, sustainable business model, the transition between a faith-based organization seeking to evolve into a fact-based organization, all those inflection points, all those borders, in my opinion, all come down to product market fit. The faith-based organization, the religion, becomes a science. The faith-based organization becomes a fact-based organization when it achieves what? Product market fit. So until you have product market fit, you're this evangelical leader trying to promote some idea that hasn't yet been proven. Try our new thing. Trust me, you're going to love it. It's 10 times better. But you need people, consumers or business people, whoever your customers are, you need them to come over to your side and actually use it for it to become a fact-based organization, for you to have evidence that you've actually achieved product market fit and that the market actually desperately wants what you've created. And that's really hard. And again, the only way to do that is to get the heck out of the office. Like that old trope of the startup founder sitting in the dungeon, with like Dr. Frankenstein, muhaha, I will build this amazing technology and the market will come and bow down to me and desire it. It doesn't work. They're not going to come. The worst movie for startup founders ever in the history of the world was Field of Dreams. If we build it, they will come. No, they won't come. If you build it, they won't come. You have to get out of the office and somehow find the market that you need to prove product market fit. You need to go to them, find them somewhere with minimal resources. And in many cases, it's not in your country. Certainly if it's an Israeli startup, the market's probably not in Israel. So how do you do that with like minimal resources and get to the right people and get the right feedback and get the right interest? It's really, really complicated. And every situation is different. Every company is different. Every startup is different. Every market is different. But the founder, among all the other crazy things that the founder needs to figure out, is this difficult task of, okay, we've built this initial thing. Who do we go to? And what represents signal? What represents noise? What represents the kind of signal that we need to prove that initial product market fit? The only way to do that is to get out of the office or get out of that dungeon and somehow meet the market where they are and get feedback that's meaningful. Really, really complicated and way too complicated for us to deal with on this lecture. But the point is, you got to do it. You have to find a way in your specific space to achieve this, initial interaction with the market to prove product market fit. And it gets even harder. I'm sorry to tell you that, the godfather of lean startup theory, Mr. Steve Blank himself, who I love, was one of the people who created this or really promoted this acronym called MVP. Now we're getting close to the Super Bowl. I'm a big Eagles fan. I hope that Jalen Hurts will be the MVP of the Super Bowl, but that's not what we mean by MVP. MVP in our context doesn't mean most valuable player. It means minimum viable product. And this was what we were all taught as founders and as entrepreneurs, that we needed to, you can't, when you do that interaction with the market, when you first come out of your dungeon and introduce your product to the market, you can't afford to build, your fully functional, totally working product. You got to do something more minimal because you have minimal resources and use that to generate interest in the market. And then if they're interested, you build your fully functional, you do your V.1 version 1.0, initial alpha, beta, whatever you want to call it. You try that on the market, and then that's your MVP. And if that works, then you come back into you hopefully raise a little bit more money and you build, the full product. We've all heard this before, but what I'm here to tell you is that MVP is probably no longer the right acronym. And in fact, in 2013, 2014, one of the most important articles I read as I became an investor was an article with a slightly alternative title called MDP, Minimum Desirable Product. because the author, Andrew Chen, who himself ultimately became a partner at Andreessen Horowitz, ironically, maintained that MVP was an old concept that only applied in the old world of B2B, particularly software. So Steve Blank was, when he was talking to his students in Stanford and Berkeley, in the mid 2000s, they were mostly startup software engineers. And he was saying to them, if you want to, improve your software product, build a crappy version. It doesn't matter if there are bugs in it. If you're going to sell it for $100 a month, build a crummy version of it. And if you can get $10 a month from your first 10 customers, you're onto something. And that worked. That might have been correct for B2B, but we're now in 2023. And that CIO of that software company that you're trying to sell your software to, she's got an iPhone in her pocket, probably an iPhone 13 or 14. And that iPhone works perfectly. And all the apps on her home screen work perfectly. If they have bugs, or they have Times Roman font or tabs that don't work, she's going to use that app for a total of about 5 seconds and then hard delete it. So the problem is that in the consumer space, the stuff that we do use has to be beautiful and has to work perfectly. And our expectation, therefore, trickles back into the B2B world. So in B2C, in the consumer world, we need a minimally desirable product. We need a product, when we see it, even for the first time, it's got to work beautifully. It's got to look great. It's got to work right. And unfortunately, for us as founders, that trickles back into the B2B world. So now everything, that minimal product needs to be minimal, but it has to be minimally desirable or minimally lovable, no longer just minimally viable. It has to, whatever we do show those initial customers in our initial foray into that market meeting where we're trying to prove product market fit with our initial alpha, beta, whatever, version 1.0, still in its infant state, that thing needs to look and act really, really good in order to attract the attention that we need. So therefore, it turns out that we now need MDP for both B2B and B2C. And that requires an even higher bar of guesswork and experimentation, so that with minimal resources, we now no longer can just get away with an MVP. We now need to use our minimal resources to create an MDP, a minimally desirable product that is so unique and so interesting that people will desperately want it, according to Ratcliffe. And that is really, really hard. And now you're starting to see why product market fit is much more elusive than we might have thought and is hard to achieve for the majority of startups. And as you can imagine, when you come out to the market with that initial MDP, it probably won't be 100% right. No matter how much work you've done on it, and no matter how much guesswork you put into it, the market probably, even if you get to the right segment of the market that gives you the right feedback, will probably want something slightly different. Even if you're directionally right, you'll probably have functions or features that need to be changed, and you may be forced to pivot. Now, this can be very traumatic for founders who have dedicated themselves to this product and to the market that they're trying to tackle. They're deeply passionate. We said that they're practically religious. They're evangelical about what they're trying to do. And then the first interaction with the market is some sort of pushback, either in whole or in part, where the market's pushing back and saying, okay, that's not what we want. We want something a little bit different or a lot different. That can be very frustrating and discouraging for a founder. And for the rest of the team. It's very common for the founder or the CEO, who's the one, or the person who's interacting with the market, to come back to the team and say, hey, I have really bad news for you. Everything you just spent days and nights eating, drinking Diet Coke and eating corn chips, working on, the market didn't want that. We need to make a whole bunch of changes. That can be very depressing for the team. But it turns out that it's actually incredibly, not just common, but probably desirable, believe it or not. It's very, very unlikely that that initial product is going to be a perfect extreme product market fit match. And if you're getting to a pivot, it might actually be very good news. So in fact, while over 9 out of 10 startups fail, the vast majority of successful startups that do succeed have gone through at least one pivot. So the pivot could actually be a positive signal. If you have strong evidence that you need to pivot early, that could actually be great news. And I encourage founders in my portfolio, if they have to pivot, to go back to them and say, hey, pull out a cake and light a candle and say, hey, congratulations, we found our pivot. Like it's time, we're getting closer to what the market wants, not further away, because the market's asking for this and this and this and this, and we have to do that. And that's our pivot, which gets us closer to the chance of success. And in fact, if you think about the metaphor of the jungle, the dirt road, and the highway, what are the chances if I parachute you and your 2 team members into a jungle with no map and minimal resources, and I say to you, without other further instructions, hey, you got to get out of this jungle at a certain point on the geography within a week, I'll meet you there. Like, what are the chances that you're gonna just in a completely organized fashion march out in a straight line exactly to that point X? No, it's almost impossible. You're going to be zigzagging and pivoting and learning from your environment and switching direction. And most of those switches of directions are probably going to get you closer to your goal. If you just keep marching blindly forward, there's almost no way you're going to get to your goal. So the message of the pivot is actually, given that we're in a jungle and given that we're in this chaotic searching for something that we don't have yet, it's actually very likely that we're going to have to pivot, and that could actually be very good news. It's the startups that don't pivot that, frankly, are probably more likely to perish in the jungle. The ones that notice the pivot and are able to capitalize on it might actually counterintuitively have a better chance of success. So the pivot is something that should be embraced and welcomed, and actually turns out like looked for, because the chance of you getting it perfectly right from the beginning are not impossible, but very, very low. Product market fit is elusive and probably requires at least 1 or 2 pivots if you're going to find it to find it. Okay, so again, most of the lecture has been about product market fit because that's the border between the jungle and the dirt road. That's like the key to survival, according to Andreessen and me and everybody else. So we spend most of the time dealing with that. I'll just kind of summarize and say, yeah, there are other sections, stages that are required. That's the dirt road and the highway. We don't have time to go into those. And frankly, those are down the line. Most startups need to get out of the jungle, and that's going to be hard enough. If you do want more resources on each of these 3 stages, if you still don't believe me and you want more credibility behind what I'm saying, I would recommend a couple. I'm a voracious reader. I believe very strongly that everyone should read, especially in the startup world. There's so much amazing things to read, to give you the background and help explain this crazy world that you're in. If I had to pick a couple books that I would pin to each of these 3 stages, after all the reading I've done, I would say Peter Thiel's 0 to 1 is probably the best book about the jungle stage. None of these books are perfect. Thiel, I don't agree with everything that he says, but I would say about 89% of what he writes in 0 to 1, I would tend to agree with. And it's probably the best single volume that discusses the crazy journey of inception to product market fit for an early stage startup company. The dirt road, probably the 2 best books. The famous one that I mentioned is Crossing the Chasm. He really deals with, okay, you have some initial traction, but how do you get across that gap to full traction and product market fit? It's an older book. A newer book that kind of supplements Crossing the Chasm is a book called Play Bigger, which is more of a playbook on how do you leverage your initial beachhead, your initial traction to get scale. And then finally, the key to success long-term on the highway is a very, very difficult book, but a fascinating book that has become very central to me, which is a book called 7 Powers by Hamilton Helmer. Helmer taught at Stanford. He's been an investor for many, many decades. He put his life's work into this book. He basically outlines 7 strategies. These are the only 7 strategies, in his opinion, based on hundreds of case studies of innovation-based technology companies, long-term sustainable growth and competition defending positions. He says there's only 7 ways to do it. Really worthwhile reading. I became so obsessed with this book that I actually wrote a novel about the book, which is a little crazy, but that's how deeply passionate I was about his writing. And I recommend 0 to 1 first, but these other books to just understand the later stages of success for an early stage startup. Okay, so for the very few startups that get out of the jungle, the dirt road is the next stage, and that involves other sub metaphors like traction. Okay, it's not clearly paved, but at least you have some traction. It might not be perfectly smooth, but at least you've put the real dangers and threats of the jungle behind you, and you're in a little bit of a safer ground. You've probably raised a round or 2 of venture capital, so you have some more resources. And now the focus in the dirt road stage is getting that initial product market fit into something called scale. And then finally, the highway is where the very, very few startups make it, that rarefied air of unicorns and success and ARR and MRR and just incredible, sustainable, scalable business models and growth. And again, I, recognize how difficult that is within my own portfolio. I recognize how difficult it was as a founder when I was in startups, but I wish for all of you that you will make it through these 3 stages and make it to the highway. So that's my wish for all of you. Hope this helped to clarify some of the challenges and some of the pitfalls and pratfalls that are along the way for many startups, and maybe highlight some of the methodologies and goals and thinking about how to get through those or over those hurdles and become successful. So I'll kind of finish there. Thank you very much for your time. If you want to follow me or follow up with me, these are some of the ways to check, follow what I do. I don't tweet that much, but I'm on there, and I think we'll just take the rest of the time for Q&A. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Ben. And as you said, yes, let's definitely open for Q&A. So if you would like to, for our guests joining today, unmute yourself, ask directly. And of course, you're always welcome to send your questions to the message board as well.
Everyone's speechless.
That's very unlikely for Israelis. Well, getting a lot of appreciative gratitude for the talk today. Indeed insightful. All right, last call. Any questions before we close?
Hi, my name is Adi. I'm with Clara Optics in Los Angeles and Israel. Can you hear me?
I hear you. Go ahead.
Yes.
Excellent. So our development team, we are in the field of optics and eyewear. My development team is mostly in the Galilee. I don't know if you're limited to Jerusalem, but Galilee is kind of in the same boat as Jerusalem, as they're not in the center of Israel. Yeah. So I find that interesting that you focused on just Jerusalem. It's a pleasure meeting you, first and foremost.
Thank you.
Yeah. You're talking about product market fit. And I'd love for you to expand on that in the sense that from what I see, a lot of startups have a great product, but the timing is off and that kills them. I mean, the best example is Nikola Tesla. It was so brilliant, only 100 years too early. Maybe you can expand on that a little bit, and how do you identify timing? Do you sometimes need to wait? Maybe if you can expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of discussion about that. There is a guy named Bill Gross, who is a very, very famous startup founder and investor. And he, if you Google it, you'll find that he did a very exhaustive study of startup success, his own study of hundreds and hundreds of startups. And his determination after many, many years was that the most important thing in startup success was timing. So not product market fit. Now, and that raised a lot of eyebrows because there were people like me and Andreessen who were in the school of thought that product market fit is the most important thing. And I don't think that they're necessarily, I think one is a component of the other. I think, product market fit requires that the market be there at the right time. If they show up later and the timing was wrong, then there is no product market fit. I think product market fit implies an element of timing. Even though I didn't use that word or say that word, I think it's built into the concept of product market fit. That clearly, the inventor of the fax machine, I don't know if you remember what fax machines were, but I'm old enough to remember fax machines. The technology, The fax machine technology was invented, I think, in the 1930s or 40s. So there's some old geezer in 1970, 1980, who's walking around saying, I invented that technology and I didn't get a nickel for it. You know, like that you could be decades too early and be completely on the right track and just not see anything for it. So I think timing is built into product market fit. It's a component of it. I didn't spend a lot of time talking about it because it's a short lecture, but I definitely agree that timing is incredibly important. I disagree with Bill Gross that timing is the only thing. I think that timing is part of product market fit. And therefore, I think we're kind of talking about the same thing, but we're just using different words.
I actually talked to Bill, and that's kind of how I
There you
came
go.
up with that. Yeah, and he didn't say it's the only. He just qualified success by what's the most important, what's the second
Right.
most important, what's
Right,
the
right, right.
last least important, and that in his mind was actually funding. He said that's the least important thing for success, which was encouraging.
Yeah, if you think about it, usually the funding is going to come with the other thing. So a lot of founders will blame the investors and say, we had the right thing, but the investors, screwed us. And the truth is that generally speaking, if you have extreme product market fit at the right time, then you're gonna find the investors and they're gonna find you, and you're gonna be able to raise the money. So it's more of a focus. I think funding comes with the other things and not the other way around. That's what I think. It's my personal opinion.
And not to make this just a single conversation, but I wanted to ask you about things like an iPhone. There was no specific need that this met or a conflict that this resolved. This is something, as Bill Gates said, he invented something people didn't know they wanted. If you can touch on that, because that, when it comes to market fit, is a harder one to identify.
Yeah, so I try, if you paid close attention to what I was saying, and I try to discipline myself to say it, my brain works mostly towards aspirin versus vitamin. Like, I'm more of an aspirin investor than a vitamin investor, meaning I respond more just personally to things that solve a big problem than things that capitalize on a big opportunity. So Facebook, Twitter, some of the most amazing, maybe even the iPhone itself, were not things that we necessarily needed, but there were things that we wanted very, very badly. So I tend to use examples of problem, but the truth is either one can work. You have very successful aspirin companies where it's solving a headache, and you have very successful vitamin companies where people could live without the vitamins, but they just want them very, very badly. So both of them work, and both of them get to product market fit if they work really, really well. So product market fit can be a function of matching really, really elegantly a major problem that was not solved, or capitalizing on a new opportunity that nobody else had capitalized on in an incredibly new way. And either one, I think, fits into Ratcliffe's definition of what do you uniquely offer that people will desperately want. Notice he doesn't say desperately need. And that's a really, really important distinction. He doesn't care whether people will desperately want it or whether they'll desperately need it. Either way, it's desperate. So if they need it, they will desperately want it, but it could just be enough to desperately want it. So the iPhone was desperately wanted. Facebook was definitely desperately wanted. Twitter was desperately wanted. It wasn't desperately needed by anybody, but it was so valuable to them that they wanted it desperately. And that was good enough. That's all that's required. So either one works, either capitalizing on a problem in a new way, or capitalizing on a new opportunity a new way. As long as in either case, it's done in a radically new way that causes people to desperately want it, both can work.
Thank you very much for that. If I may be so rude to ask, if I wanted to reach you, what would be a good way to do that? And you can answer privately if you'd like.
You can email me. I'm not one of these VCs that hides behind, oh, you want to reach me? Follow me on Twitter. You can email me at ben@jumpspeed.vc. Again, I'm exclusively dedicated to investing in startups from Jerusalem. So Galilee, there are other investors that look at that. So
our offices are actually in Jerusalem. The team just works out of Galilee.
I'm
If,
happy.
if we want to be specific, but
Okay. Happy to
said
hear
it
from
was
you.
Ben at jumpspeed.vc.
Ben at jumpspeed.vc.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I do my best to answer questions. I'm not such a busy guy, but sometimes it gets a little bit cuckoo.
We do have a few other questions on the message board. How do you cross the Death Valley being a deep tech regarding high capital, 4 years till first ARR?
Yeah. So I have a couple of those in my portfolio. They're very challenging. I mean, the good news, listen, there's so many different ways to answer the question. I'm not a guru. I would say, typically speaking, deep tech companies should find investors who are deep tech investors, because then you're speaking the same language. The deep tech VCs, the ones who have openly advertised that they invest in deep tech, they understand that it takes a longer time for ARR, and they're not looking for those kind of milestones when they're looking to invest in companies. They're going to be much more scientifically oriented. They're going to look at the proofs of concept. They're going to look at the demos. They're going to look at the initial results, the scientific results, or whatever it is that you're doing. So it's about finding the right investors for your company and not trying to pitch the classic software SaaS investors who are really used to looking at companies that within a year or two generate ARR, and then you come as a deep tech company and they have no idea how to look at you. There are plenty of VCs out there in Israel and other countries that have some of them have exclusive focuses on deep tech. I would say those are the ones you want to focus on and just try to engage them, because they'll understand your world, they'll understand they have different milestones that they're going to apply to your company. And if you have something really amazing, you'll be able to get funding from them way before you have generated revenue. I've seen that in my portfolio, and I've seen it outside of my portfolio. It's about finding the right kind of investor. VCs are like snowflakes. We're not all the same. We're very, very different, and we're looking for different things. And most of us put it on our websites or out there, what we're looking for. So do the work and try to find, don't just blast an email to every single VC that you can find. Try to handpick the ones that are most likely based on what they've advertised they're looking for. And if you're a deep tech company, try to find deep tech investors. That's the easy answer.
And he has a question, which is approaching companies to understand unmet needs, expected quantities, and RE involves risks, such as copying your idea, biz model, or IP. How do you mitigate the risks?
Well, lots of different ways to answer that question. If it's deep tech, then you want to probably file your patents, and at least, nobody wants to sign NDAs. Sometimes they do, but you really want to try to have some patent coverage so that you can talk more freely with potential partners because you're covered by the patent filing. Again, these are short answers to these questions. If you don't have protectable IP, then you're looking at a whole different world where you just have to take a risk sometimes. And two of the words that I hate the most in startup world are stealth mode. Like, stealth mode can kill you. And, you have to at some point decide whether you trust the partners that you're talking to enough to show them enough to get them to engage with you and take some risks. And it's much more likely that you're going to harm yourself by not talking to people than you're going to harm yourself by talking to people. Like, there are only a few companies in the world who really try to steal stuff. And the rest of them, as long as you can be smart about not showing them the actual secret sauce, if you can, you should definitely, I would say stealth mode is a bad thing, and you only live once. The clock is ticking for your startup. You only get to do this in a very short period of time. The windows close very quickly. You got to run to the market and talk to them, even if it means exposing yourself a little bit. Again, if you have protectable IP, slap some patent applications on it so that you're covered by that. If you don't, then you might just need to take a risk and start showing people stuff and hope that you can trust them. It's complicated. I definitely understand that it's complicated, but generally the smart thing to do is to take the risk and not to fear copying. If it's that easy to copy, then maybe you don't have something that's so unique that's going to cause people to desperately want it. So if they can copy it that easily just by looking at it, then maybe it's not the right thing in the first place.
Great. And we have one other question. What are your thoughts on the Japanese market? Is it a good market to approach?
I have no idea. I mean, yeah, it's as good as any other market, but I mean, generally speaking, unless there's a very specific reason that you're in the Japanese market, it's a Japanese focused product, or you have a special partner in Japan. Usually, the common thought is to prove it in the larger markets first, which is US, Europe, because again, I'll give you the Israeli example. So I'm based in Israel. We have Israeli companies that often have proven. I even had one in my portfolio. They got some really nice traction with Israeli customers, and were not able to raise more money because when they started to try to get to foreign markets, it was a total dud. There was just something about them or the product that was resonating, or maybe they had connections in the local market that they were able to leverage. But when they tried to sell it in the broader global market, it totally failed. And the investors skewered them for that because they showed that there was something either about the product or about the founders or the team that was unable to scale it globally. And it wasn't going to be worth anything if it couldn't scale globally. So the problem with focusing on one market exclusively, if it's a small market, is that it may not demonstrate enough product market fit for investors or the people that you need later on for the broader market. So a lot of companies like to try to start quickly by generating some traction in the ultimate market first, because then it serves as a credibility builder for what they can do in the future. Again, these things all have exceptions. There are some pretty cool examples of consumer companies that launched their products in New Zealand and Australia on purpose because they wanted to experiment there and make some mistakes. And they felt that if they made mistakes in New Zealand, it wouldn't get out to America. But if it did work, then they could, put resources into, expanding it globally. So again, there's lots of different ways to answer this question. I would say, unless you have some specific reason why Japan is an important market for you and will serve as a credibility builder for the future for other markets, then I would try to focus on other markets first. But I don't know enough about the situation to give you a good answer.
All right, we have one last question before we close. What major trends, technologies do you vision in the next 2 to 5 years?
So I don't like to answer that question. I don't feel that I'm a prophet. I read the same things that everyone else is reading. I'm much more of a reactive investor, and I don't issue my predictions for 2023, predictions for 2024. Most of the people that I read who do that end up writing another post a year later saying I was wrong on half of these things. So it's very hard to see the future. I'm much more tuned into identifying, like I said, problems that exist today and trying to analyze some newfangled idea that has some crazy revolutionary new way of solving a problem that was thought to be unsolvable or that had never been solved before. So I'm not your guy to make predictions about the next 2 or 5 years. And I don't think that's necessarily the VC's job. I think too many VCs jump into that trap where they feel that it's important for them to predict the future for everybody else because we're supposed to be investing in the future. I'm more, again, it's a big nuance, but I'm more about like what Mike Maples Jr. talks about. I'm more about, I want to meet people who they have been in the future in a specific industry and they've come back to the present to tell us what they've figured out about that specific future in that specific industry. So I love meeting those people and having them teach me about what the future looks like in their world and seeing if I get it and if I can ride along with them. It's not about me seeing the future and then trying to find startups that meet my future view. It's exactly the opposite. So I'm humble enough to say that I think that's actually my job. And I think I'm fairly good at it. I think VCs who try to do the other thing and try to say, we can see the future, we're smart enough to see the future, and we're going to look for startups that match our view of the future, they're often very, very, very wrong. So I don't speak that way. I don't think that way. I don't think that's my job. I think I'm much better off meeting really, really smart entrepreneurs who themselves have been in the future in their space, have seen the future in what they do, and come back and teach me about how they can use their view of the future to solve some pressing problem that, was never solved until today. So again, I'm the wrong guy to answer that question. I respect other VCs that try to do it, but they're often pretty wrong.
Well, Ben, on behalf of Paul Merage and the Merage Institute and all of our fellows joining us today, thank you so much for enlightening our Merage tribe. And to everyone who joined us today, thank you so much. Until next week, appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you.